Welcome to the Cold Outreach Podcast, where we talk with entrepreneurs, business owners, and sales leaders about their journey using cold outreach to jumpstart their careers and their businesses. So today we've got Marcus Chan, who is recognized as one of the leading sales experts in the world by both Salesforce and LinkedIn. He was a top producer for 13 years and was a sales director leading over 110 employees at a Fortune 500 company. He now owns Venly Consulting Group, which is one of the fastest growing sales training companies around, helping thousands of sales professionals double their sales results in 90 days. He's also the author of Six-Figure Sales Secrets. Marcus, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, man, I'm pumped to be here. It's great to catch up.
Same here. So I want to take a quick step back and go back in time to when you're first getting started and you had no connections or reputation to rely on. What sort of outreach did you do to start growing in your business and in your sales career?
Cool. I'm going to probably break it two different segments because there was when I was working for somebody else and building it that way. And then there was also how I basically built my business too, right? And because of those different seasons in my life and the knowledge I had in my head, I approached things in a very different way. So let me start with my career first. So I think like a lot of sales professionals, when they go into sales, for most people that get thrown into the deep end, it's like, hey, good luck and get after it. And mine was really no different. Now, this is back in 2007 during the last recession. So there was no real training, no real marketing, no real leads. They had a homegrown CRM system and they basically said, go. That was really it. And my initial outreach, no joke, because I literally was like, hey, boss, what should I go do? I've never done sales in my life, by the way. I'm like, what should I go do? He's like, I want you to go outside and I want you to walk into businesses. So my very first cold outreach was literally going door to businesses, like by foot. And I remember that day, I asked him first, I'm like, hey, how many should I walk into? He's walking to 30. I walked into over 60 that day, and I didn't book a single meeting. I didn't have any interest. That didn't close any deals, right? But that was like my very first start into that. And then that evolved into, what should I do next? He's like, you got to call them. So I'm like, let me call them next. Then eventually I learned how to cold email. And by the way, I got no results early on. So like I really struggled because I was just trying to go after everybody. And that was how I got my start as like first time in sales. Now, as an entrepreneur, I learned a lot at that point because fast forward 13 plus years, pretty fortunate to figure out how to do cold outreach, to actually how to run deals, how to close deals and do it over and over. In my corporate career, I did generate close over 140 million ARR, right, in 13 years. So did pretty well. Ended up hitting my quota 13 years in a row, 100, 250%. Hit President's Club pretty much every single year. Missed it by a couple of years because of, let's just call it like some of the stupid KPIs that shouldn't really matter, but it is what it is. Still the overall target, but it is what it is, whatever. So when I started my business, I had made a lot of mistakes. That's why I want to share that piece first, because some people, when they hear about how fast my business grew, they're like, oh, wow, like you have magic touch. No, I don't. I just failed for so many years earlier on. Like I made all the mistakes. I figured out what didn't work, what did work. So when I started my business, I could be like way more targeted. So when I jumped headfirst into starting my own business in September 2019, I had at least a better strategy, if you will. Number one, I was really clear on who I was going to go after. Before, I didn't really know my ideal customer profile. I was going after anyone and everyone. Now I knew who I wanted to go after. So I could be much more targeted about my approach. But I also knew, because it was just me, and I didn't have the resources of a company, it's just gonna be me, I'll be burning my own cash. I'm like, okay, like I also need to make sure I maximize my time and do highly leveraged things. So when I started my business, literally my outreach was a different approach. I'm building hyper-targeted lists on LinkedIn, and I'm sending connection requests, and I'm sending manual video messages in my initial outreach. So this is cutting through the noise, right? So my initial outreach early on when I built my business, I would say started off the back of literally doing cold video messages on LinkedIn. And then I'll leverage social selling, where I was leveraging commenting and engaging, going after and borrowing traffic off of my competitors that I knew were in the space, identifying their weaknesses, building content that basically opposed their weaknesses and showed a different positioning, and leverage social selling, and then generate inbound eyeballs, in which then I would take those and I would maximize them through the DMs to go from there. Then it scaled to cold emails with that, and then it scaled to generating lead magnets where I could drive organic traffic to the lead magnets, scaling that, and then having a whole outbound system of that from calling, basically multi-touch as part of it. So grew much faster as a result, but a lot was because I had learned quite a bit from my earlier mistakes, and I was able to take and apply it for my own business.
That's super interesting. I love that you touched on this evolution, and I think that'll be a great stepping stones as we go through this conversation to touch on. Going back to those early days when your bosses just get out there and just get in front of these people, what were some of the most surprising responses that you received doing that cold outreach, walking into businesses or cold calling them? What were some of those responses you got?
So from a contextual perspective, this is also the season where businesses are starting to shut down. So it was really hard to get money and funding. Businesses are basically shutting down, like going under, unemployment was going up. So literally the objections were like, hey, we're shutting down our business. Okay. Like, okay, that's, I can't like, hey, that's why we got to meet. Let me show you how we can help. They're like, get out of here. So that was a really interesting one. For sure, people are cursing at me. With the in-person, when you do also in-person prospecting as well, you ran into just weird things. I had someone pull a gun on me before in person on a cold call. I've had dogs bite me on in-person cold calls. You just deal with just other things as part of it. Plus, on top of that, cold calling for sure on the phone is hard. Cold emailing, so all that stuff is hard to a certain extent, but you do get to do the comfort of your laptop in your home for the most part, unless you're in an office. When you're doing both, like field sales and also on the laptop as well, you also deal with being like outside. So like literally if it's pouring down rain, it's icy out, it's snowing, you're out in the elements as well, trying to knock on doors and have conversations with people. But on top of that, the mental game gets really, really tough. My mentor said the hardest door to get through is actually your house door. So once you get out of your house door, the second hardest door is actually out of your car door, because even in between, if you walked into one business, get completely your face kicked in, it takes a certain mindset to get back in your car and now drive to the next business. Or if you're in a business park, to keep on going now after you got bitten by a dog, to keep going to next businesses after that and be relentless towards that. Versus if you're on an auto dialer, you can be a little bit more mindless with it and not have to think while it does it for you. But here, you're forced to make these micro decisions on the spot that I didn't really anticipate, because it's like, you're like, oh, that was so hard. Like cold call, I got my face kicked in. Should I go to this next one? They're probably gonna tell me the same thing. They're probably telling me I'm gonna go out of business. You start getting your own head in a whole different way. And then you add in the other components of you're physically uncomfortable because you're drenched, completely drenched, and you're wet, you're uncomfortable, and like you're out in the elements. And it's just like a mental game. So there's weird things for like these external objections for prospects, but you also create a lot of internal objections to yourself and actually do what you need to do to be successful.
We see that so much, even when just people trying to send email, they get in their head thinking about the rejection aspect of it. And this is sales in general, right? Selling can be a space of getting rejected nonstop in order to get that one yes.
That's right.
When you're in the field, I'm so curious, did you have like mantras? Did you have a routine? What were you able to do in order to cultivate the courage to overcome the fear of rejection in that role?
Yeah. So the first thing was, first, it was really hard. Like you don't know what you don't know. So like after my first couple months of blaming everything in the world for all my problems, blaming everything from a bad boss, my bad territory, lack of leadership, lack of support, lack of everything, and even no real PMF as I thought, because we were a startup division of a big company. After I went through all that rigmarole and blamed everything else, and I realized it didn't change my circumstances unless I changed, I started to realize I need to make a change. And I got really into the personal development books and reading books. And that was like a first piece where I actually didn't know anything, mantras or any of that type of stuff quite yet. And what was interesting was as I read these books about motivation, like Tony Robbins, Zig Ziglar, etc., the common theme was like they had a way to basically set their state before they went into the day. And that's when I started to make these changes. So early on, I did very minor things, and now it's gotten much more intense because I realized life is just a mental game. But what I started to do, even the first thing was like, we'd go to the office daily at the time. It wasn't the same as it is now, but back then everyone went to the office. So it was a 45-minute commute one way. And I also realized I used to listen to the news. It would make me feel bad. Like I would listen to the news. They'd be like, hey, again, unemployment keeps going up. Interest rates keep going up. Businesses are shutting down. The world's falling apart. I'm like, oh my God. It made me feel bad. And it only reinforced the stories I was already hearing from my prospects. So when they gave me objections, I'm like, I guess you're right. We probably shouldn't have a conversation. I'll just fall prey to that. So the first thing I started doing was I started eliminating things that actually would hurt my mental mindset. I cut out the news and I replaced it with stuff that actually would feed me better, feed me more stuff. So for example, I started listening to audiobooks. I was broke and didn't have any money. I literally would go to the public library and I would get all these personal development books, like CDs on tape, and I would burn them onto my laptop, upload them to my iPod Pro or iPod, whatever version I had. And then I had an old stereo in my car. It didn't have the plug-in, but I got one of those FM transmitters. So I don't remember those, but you had it has like 100.9. You get in that frequency on your iPod and also on this, you can hear it through that. So I started doing that because on my commute, I couldn't like risk driving around trying to change CDs in my car. So I started to listen to these just like to brainwash myself. I turned my car into a university on wheels. So that was like the first piece. Then I learned about affirmations. So I started to do affirmations, just making sure if it is to be, it's up to me. Control the controllables. Whatever I can glob onto, I found it to be powerful. I would start doing that, right? And then I started to learn about how to reprogram your mind. I also learned as part of my journey trying to become a better version of myself was oftentimes when we get dealt with tough circumstances or situations, we start creating questions in our mind that we start answering that are disempowering. So for instance, someone yells at me on the phone and said, hey, you're a piece of crap, never call me again. They hang up. I would go, in my head without realizing it, God, they're such a jerk. What is wrong with them? What is wrong with me? Why is this job so hard? And without realizing it, my brain would answer, they're in a bad mood because they're probably going out of business and the economy's bad. And realistically, you're probably going to fail anyways in sales because you can't hack it. You probably need to go to marketing or some other role. You're just not good at this job. And I call these ants automatic negative thoughts. One would crawl in and then another would keep crawling in. Before I knew it, I had an infestation in my brain of these negative thoughts. So I started to realize this and I said, what could be the solution here? What could I do instead? And I realized the answer was that I need to ask myself better questions. Questions like, if I had a tough cold call same situation, hey, what can I learn from this? What can I do differently? How can I take control of the conversation? How can I show up as an equal to that prospect? How can I get a more desirable outcome? If I don't know the answer, who might know the answer? How can I improve my skill set? In what world can I see this being where I'm successful? And it wasn't overnight, but I literally had, no joke, a Post-it note with some of these questions written down, taped to my monitor, and then the same ones on my car visor, because I realized when I was in the field, those things would still hit me the same thing after a tough cold call. So I had to get back in my car, I had to reset myself. And then on top of that, I started to learn, what else can I control? And I realized there's only two things: my attitude, my actions. So doing things like that was really powerful. So it's control. But you know what? When I feel physically fit, I feel better on calls, actually. I feel more confident. So what can I do? I can eat better. I can work out better. Oh, hey, when I party too heavy and I black out and the next day I feel terrible and I try to make cold calls, maybe I should stop blacking out. I started paying very close attention on what I could eliminate and replace with better habits. On top of that, I started to invest into myself. So that was a big thing. I started to go to Tony Robbins conferences, hiring mentors, joining coaches and programs, because I wanted to create the environment to be successful, because that's a big part of the game. Because if you're just surrounded by a bunch of people who are complaining, which was my team, it wasn't making me any better. So I had to force and create a situation where I could thrive. It was a combination of all of those type of things. And it wasn't overnight, but I would start adding in these things over time so I could help set myself up to at least give my brain a fighting chance to stay positive and keep going.
I really love that, because that's the same thing I see. It's a negative attitude pattern that is the thing that's holding everybody back from doing more cold outreach and putting themselves out there. So
That's right.
what were some of those misconceptions that you had about doing cold outreach and sales in general that you were able to change with working on your self-development, basically?
Yeah. First one was, it's a numbers game. And I think a lot of people interpret the numbers game as in a volume game. I don't want to say there's not power in doing volume, because there is some benefits to the volume when you're new, in the sense of the more repetition you do of something, the better you're going to get, because that's really actually quite critical. But if you continue to compound that over time, it doesn't really make sense. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions is, let's just keep doing that and let's just scale it up. But reality is when you look at like how to be actually high leverage, volume is only one piece of the equation. And really what's most important is how effectively you actually do something. So it's like looking at your actual conversions at each stage to get better. For instance, like if I make 200 cold calls, so let's say on the phone, let's say I have a 10% connector rate. So I'm like, I talked to 20 people. Great. All right. Out of the 20, if I'm converting 20%, then I'm booking 4 people, right? And the average rep and most average leaders say, hey, good job, little Marcus. Let's double that. Let's just double it to 400 calls, because then you're just going to double your appointments. Yes, by pure simple math, that logic makes a lot of sense, okay? But when you think about that, what's the damage to your mind when you have to do that? How much more extra effort do you have to do? Is that truly the highest leverage thing? Versus the smart rep, or the one who realizes conversions means better at senior skills is a better way of doing things, thinks, but what if that 20% conversion on the phone, how can I get to 30%, 40%, 50%? How do I get to 80%? Because if you get to 80%, now suddenly you're booking like 4 times the amount of appointments in the same level of effort. You're just much more skilled. Now, it's harder to do because it requires advancing your sales skills. But that's what I realized. I'll give you a really simple example. 2011, I switched companies and I started having a lot of success pretty early on. And I remember early on though, my manager said, hey, Marcus, I want you to make 80 calls today. It's like week 1. I want you to make 80 calls and I want you to see if you can book like 8 meetings. That'd be really amazing. So he, of course, pulls the most garbage list. I was new. I think he's trying to test. He wanted to test my skills. All right. He pulls me the most garbage list, gives it to me, and I grind through. And again, this is like 4 years into my B2B sales career. At this point, I ran sales teams. I have like top people. I've had success. I built things from scratch. So I have like more experience. I have a lot of context there. So even the 80 dials, I booked 7 meetings. Now, I'll tell you right now, they were pretty crappy meetings. The lead list is pretty bad, to be accurate. It was not a good list. And I was booking for somebody else. I'm like, okay, I'm pretty good. I'll book these meetings. So I book it. And I felt pretty exhausted, to be quite frank. And so I went to him. I said, hey, listen, let me build my own lead list. Let me just do what I normally do if you're cool with it. And I'll book you the same amount, if not more meetings. And I'll do it in less time. Because his other thing was like, I want you to be here Mondays 8 to 12 on the phones. But I said, what if I could do it in 2 hours? Do I have to stay here all the 4 hours? I don't want to stay here. If I choose to stay here, I'm going to do income producing activities in those 2 hours. But I don't want to just stay here and make more calls just to make more calls. Like, you tell me you want me to get 8 appointments, I'll get you 8 appointments. Like, he's like, sure, prove it to me. Because I've done it before, I just built a way better quality list, came properly prepared. That following Monday, I made like 40 calls because it was much more curated. I booked 9 appointments in under 2 hours. And he looks at me and is like, what just happened? I'm like, I don't want to just work harder. I like to be really effective and efficient because the money is not in making the appointments. I need to be running those calls. So I much prefer now these other 2 hours. I'm going to prepare for those sales calls later this week, and I'm absolutely going to crush it. And that's when you understand the leverage. You start realizing it's a higher leverage thing to increase your skills. But a lot of people don't realize that. And what they hope is their skills advance by time just going by. But the reality is time going by does not mean your skills will advance. All it means is time goes by. If you've been a parent for 20 years, it doesn't mean you're a great parent still. It just means you're a parent for 20 years. If you've been in sales for 10 years, it doesn't mean you're great in sales. It just means you're in sales for 10 years. Unless you have a track record, right? It's completely different. That's why if you meet certain people who might be 5 years in sales, but they've made so much more money than you, chances are pretty good they're better skilled than you are at the game of sales. So the question is, how can I advance my skills across the board from outreach to running the deal so I don't just spin my wheels trying to play the activity game?
I like that because it's almost counterintuitive to what you hear most mainstream advice, which is if you want to get more, just double your volume, do as much as you can. Even to an extent, Hormozi talks about just do more, right? But in a way, what I'm hearing is something that's like practice perfect. You know what I mean? Make perfect practice. And I'm curious because you said that it was almost list building that was maybe that one meta skill that improved your overall conversion rate. Are there any other skills that you would recommend for cold outreach or for outreach in general that you're like, hey, if you were to be able to focus on these, this is what's going to move the needle for your overall career, for overall progress?
So for sure, list building is a really key one. Another really key one, I'm not going to say them in order because I don't think they're all really important. Being able to truly understand your prospects' problems and write messaging that aligns to them. I think that's really, really critical because you get the perfect list, but if it's not relevant and doesn't hit on certain things that it's going to be in the mind of the prospect of where they're at, it decreases your chances of conversion, right? That's also a really key skill. I would say consistency and discipline is really important too. Just being consistent with just like doing it, it's amazing like how much better it's going to be. I'll give you an example. I was just talking to a client a week ago. He says, Marcus, it's Q4. It's crazy. Like my plan is I'm going to try to empty out my pipeline and then come like Jan 1, I'm going to start working on building a pipeline. I'm like, stop. That's the wrong way to think. Like this is how you go from like feast to famine between quarters is you stop doing the daily things. If you know that you have a wedding coming up in the summertime, if you just eat really healthy and work out really hard for the first couple months before that, you'll get in pretty good shape for that wedding. But what happens after? Now you're in terrible shape and it's not good for your health. You don't feel good anyways versus you build consistency and compound consistency. You're better off making sure every single day, maybe you're just really busy more deals. So maybe you don't necessarily prospect for 3 hours a day and you can only do an hour a day. Well, an hour a day consistently is still way better than not doing it at all. So being able to just be really consistent with it is going to be really key. I think what's also key as well is preparation. It's a 100% controllable thing, but like, how are you preparing yourself to do the outreach? I always highly recommend when you're going to do outreach, let's say you have a cold call block. You're going to cold call for 2 hours straight on, let's say, Monday morning. You shouldn't be doing any research on that time. You shouldn't be looking stuff up. You don't want to be multitasking. You don't want to be opening up Slack, jumping around. You don't want to be context switching. Have 6 Sense open up. So you're trying to like look at like the most recent stuff they did on there. You want to do that research in advance in a different time block. Now during your cold call session, those 2 hours, my only objective is basically to go through the calls and make the calls I'm going to make. Singular focus, one single task. That preparation is going to be really key. Another thing I find is really useful is because it's hard to do, it's difficult to actually commit to doing, you have to make sure you eliminate obstacles and make it easy for yourself. And this goes back into preparation. I remember early on, I knew I was supposed to cold call. I get to the office, all I got to do, let me just clean my desk area up a little bit. Oh, like yesterday's coffee mug on there. There's some snack crumbs. I want to wipe it clean. Dust everything, and then I'll be good. Oh, you know what? I just want to check my email because I want to make sure anybody emailed me and get back to them. And it's 4 hours later. You're like, oh my God, I didn't do what I was supposed to do, right? Versus set yourself up to be successful. So I'll give you a really simple example. This is like 2011 at the new company. We had our call blocks 8 to 12. That was the set thing that our boss wanted to do. So most reps, they got there right before 8. They put their laptop down, go get a coffee, go get a water, go get a snack. They open the laptop up, they dock it up, they load up the CRM, they start building the list. Before 2 hours goes by. I just did all the stuff beforehand. So literally 7:55, I'm plugged in, docked in, ready to go. So once it's 8, I got my headset already on. I'm already like going. 1 second after, the first call is already ringing. I'm already ready to go. So I'm making it easy for myself to do those things. But it starts with what I did the prior day or on the prior week at the end of the week to make sure I'm set up. On top of that, think about any great athlete. Let's say it's Michael Phelps. I love Michael Phelps. It's a perfect example. At the Olympics, before he retired, it's not like he just woke up and dove in the pool and won a bunch of gold medals. That's not what happened. He woke up and he warmed up first. He stretched properly, ate properly. He listened to music himself in the game. He has his own little routines and mantras he did just get mentally set. And so he had this whole thing he did just to be mentally ready and physically ready before getting on the blocks. And that's just what I did as well. I would listen to audiobook. Got to a point where I would actually role play out loud for 45 minutes in my car. So I would run through the first 10 dials out loud and I would imagine 5 objections. So I'd imagine I get the worst objections. Like, hey, we're going out of business. We're completely shutting down. We hate your guts. We used to use you in the past. We hate you guys. I would just imagine the worst object and I'd role play out loud exactly how it should sound. Like I'll put myself into state multiple times. So by the time I got to making my first call, my neural pathways are already warmed up. All I need to do now is hit go. So I was warmed up already. And for those who are watching this out there, I'm not saying you have to do that, but you have to have your own version of getting yourself mentally ready. That could be as simple as I'm going to make sure I have a coffee before I start calling, and I'm going to do some jumping jacks, get my blood flowing, right? Maybe listen to some music. You make sure your list is ready to go. Like maybe you're going to call a buddy on your team and just role play the first few rounds. Just do at least have a 10-minute warm up. So once you're going, you're not like going to drop the ball. I love this quote. This is one of my favorite quotes, which is we look at pro athletes and amateurs. Amateurs play more than they practice. Pros practice more than they play. The pro is constantly practicing. So once they have the ball, it's go time. So when you think about like even a 10% connect rate, which is like probably decent, most is like 5 to 10%. But like once that person answers, are you ready to go? Or are you fumbling the ball? And the only way you're not going to fumble the ball is if you have mentally set yourself up to win. But most people have a low conversion because once that clicks through and they actually answer, like, hey, Nick, I didn't think you were going to. Anyways, hey, how you doing? Bad habits kick in because they haven't built the right habits and they weren't properly warmed up. So just a couple things.
There's so many gems in there. Honestly, I want to go back to the second thing you said about writing message that resonates with the list, how important that is when you're sending outreach like that.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, I know you said you transitioned when you were working for yourself to your own thing of doing video outreach, but I'm curious, most people never start there. So did you send outreach that like totally bombed in the past? And how did you learn to get to the point of sending value-based outreach like videos?
I've bombed a lot of outreach, first off. I think it's part of the game. If you don't know what you're doing, you bomb a lot. So I think the first piece is hopefully you have a tight feedback loop and you track your numbers for the conversions. Oh man, shoot, I sent out like 100 emails and I only had a 10% open rate. That's weird. And I had like a 0.01% reply rate. That's weird. And then booking meetings. Those are symptoms of something greater. So you want to start diagnosing those. So having that data is really important first off, right? And then working to improve it, right? But I think the biggest thing is whenever something bombs, it's really important to take a pause back and say, what could be done differently? And I'll give you a simple example. So I had some outreach this past year that totally bombed. All right. We built a whole new offer, a new B2B offer, and I built a list of like 80 or so prospects and built out, I think it was like a 15 touch sequence, launched it, ran it, and booked 5 meetings off it. And each offer is like $50K each. So it's like about $250K in opportunity. I'm like, that's actually not bad. I'm like, okay, that was my first test of this play with this offer. Let's scale this. I use Apollo, so I built all my lists, buy intent, I got it all built out, and I run the sequence. And I think we put 1,000 contacts to start off with into it. Completely bombed. I had super high open rates. We had, as a whole, like 80% open rates, click-through rates they were like 10% click-through rates. Response rates was like 5 to 8% response rates. But we didn't book any meetings. And I'm like, this is weird. That completely bombed, right? Because at the end, the ultimate metric is did I book qualified pipelines in a close? That's really, like, at the end of the day, that's what really matters. And I'm like, this is really strange. And I had to really look myself in the mirror. And it was interesting was after I was running those 5 ops, and by the way, those 5 ops actually did not close, which also was another little data point. And I realized there's a mismatch in the offer in the market. I realized that my list probably was still too broad in terms of who I was going after. As a result of it, it resonated to a certain level, but not deep enough. So to me, that was really powerful. And to me, it's not necessarily it's bombed, but I learned a lot. And what ended up happening because of that is now we're actually changing who we go after for the B2B offer, and we made the offer even better. So this is actually really powerful for us to learn from. So we're working to scale that offer next. So I won't say it's a success quite yet because I want to see consistency. But whenever something doesn't go the way you want to, you shouldn't just write it off. It should be like, hey, what can I learn from this? What can we adapt from this? How can we take some of these learnings and just apply it towards how we're going to continue to go? Because as Alex Hormozi says, I cannot lose if I do not quit. If you have that mindset, you're going to win.
So the reason why I like that and it's insightful is because I think something that a lot of our audience, they're founders and entrepreneurs for the most part that we find. And one thing is you can have all the tools, you can have all the things in place to do outreach and you can be reaching out to the most targeted people. But if your offer doesn't resonate, then you're not going to win no matter what. And
That's right.
We often find that the offer is one of the most, if not the most important thing when it comes to cold outreach working.
100%.
I'm curious because now that you've been able to talk about that aspect of one where it's bombed, do you remember having a outreach or a sequence that you put out that actually resonated or was able to provide an opportunity or partnership that was like life-changing, like massive leverage that came from that one outreach?
What's interesting is, to me, it's like nothing earth-shattering, but I've created a lot of types of sequences and all types of outreach, for all types of things from selling things to sponsorships to opportunities. And sometimes it's the simplest ones where I've ran some very simple, literally LinkedIn-only ones. Just like literally engaging, commenting, and then like video messaging and a little bit of follow-up. And some have been the best ones where we've set up like partnerships to like where I can tap into that person's audience who has the audience that I want. So we're doing webinars together or podcasts or events together. And it's like multiplies, not just like the money generated off it, but it's just like the exposure. I'm able to borrow their audience a whole new level. So like for sure, it's definitely happened. Now, I'll say the key to some of those is I was able to do some of that even a little bit later on with more of a brand presence on LinkedIn. Because of that, I've positioned myself in a certain way to be able to do it. And it wasn't overnight. So it's taking like what are my strengths here I can leverage and how can I maximize that to be able to get in front of the people I want to get in front of.
So that's a great segue into there's sales outreach and there's marketing type outreach. But then speaking of that, almost like cold networking, how do you see that as being different? Like when you're doing outreach to build more of a network, how do you approach that differently than if you're approaching like a sales outreach?
If it's cold networking, there's some similarities, right? So whenever someone gets cold outreach, they're always asking with them, what's in it for me? So it's really no different when you're doing like cold outreach to somebody else. It's like, what's in it for them? That's really like what you're thinking about. So when you do an outreach to someone that's LinkedIn or a cold email, how can you reach out? And ideally, there's some sort of leverage to it from behind. For example, I wanted to start working with Apollo. Now, last year when I was at Dreamforce doing some stuff with Salesforce, we had a dinner where I got to meet their VP community and a few other people within Apollo. So I didn't like right after send a connection request. Hey, let's do something together. I would subtly engage and comment, DM them every now and then. And then when I thought there'd be an opportunity for a partnership, then I'm like, hey, I have this idea. Would you be open to talking more about it? And of course, because I'm playing a little longer game here, they're like, yeah, this totally works. So we're able to work off each other's network. But if you think about even a cold outreach perspective, the principles I'm sharing here it's not earth shattering, which is how can I provide value for them? How can I provide them something mutually beneficial? How can I play the long game and not just always be saying, hey, how can this be a benefit to me? So that does mean sometimes you're going to turn away short-term money for long-term money. But at the end of the day, it's understanding what's the greater leverage long-term wise for what you're trying to work towards.
WIFM all day long,
That's it,
right?
man.
What's in it for me? We had talked about a lot of qualities and skills, and you had brought up a couple. I'm curious because I want to go into future pacing just a little bit. Now that you've had a lot of experience both being in the field, you've seen how sales is occurring in the current age of like massive email, massive cold call. You have power dialers, you have tools like Sendly and the like. Where do you see the future going with cold outreach in your opinion?
Yeah, obviously AI is a big part of it, right? I think that's obviously a big thing. Depending on how far out we go, but I think we already see a lot of trends across the market, right? So we're starting to see, number one, less SDRs. The SDR to AE ratio is already expanding. Now it's one SDR to 4 AEs or 6 AEs. We're starting to see that as well because some of the tools are starting to have, right? We're also seeing a conversion to full cycle. So that's a big thing we're seeing too. So just full cycle reps because some of these have these tools at hand. We're already seeing AI agents for sure. That's already a thing already. So it's the greatest, but like they're going to be pretty good. Like for instance, Salesforce has one where it's not designed to completely replace the SDR. It's supposed to be like, hey, give them the tier 3 accounts and let them like mass blast them, if you will. But as a result of it, anytime you can scale something like this, it just leads to more crap out there. That's the issue. We're already in a trust recession, so people are already really skeptical across the board. So it's continue to get harder for sure. It'll be harder to break through the noise, harder to get a hold of execs. It'll be hard for basically everything. What does it actually mean for sales professionals these days? It means a couple things, and also entrepreneurs. Number one, how can we make sure what we build is going to be more omni-channel? Number two, how can it be super relevant to them? And how can we make sure we stand out as much as we can? And how can we utilize some of these tools now, not just to do more outreach, but to do better outreach? So if you have tools that can generate far more relevant, much more personalized messages, that's gonna be way better. So I really don't care if I get a cold message or if I get an ad that's written by AI. If it's really relevant to me, it talks to the problem I'm dealing with. I really don't care where it came from versus having a bunch of messages from people that are just, or spam ones are obviously very fake. So I think we're just going to see a trend across the board. Now, I do think eventually SDRs are going to go away completely. That's just the nature of the beast. Or we're going to see it to a point where you only see them probably in an enterprise org for a more strategic, complex sale that requires a far more skilled person to do it. But that's how I see it. That's probably why I see it from the future of like outreach. I think eventually it gets to a point where hopefully it'll be completely automated and it'll be completely AI driven, but also be useful and relevant and not spam like, which is what it is right now.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I love that you said trust recession, because I feel like that is the one thing everyone agrees on right now is that trust is falling off a cliff because of how much volume AI is producing nowadays. And so I'm actually curious. We're already seeing it with like on LinkedIn and on X, where there's just armies of ID verified fake accounts, right? There's just armies of bots now doing outreach. So I'm curious, with that being said, what like challenges do you anticipate for entrepreneurs, salespeople doing cold outreach in the next 5-10 years are going to face with that trust recession?
I think across the board, because people are more skeptical, there's going to be a lot of outreach out there, but the way it's designed now with all these AI bots, it's almost become like a marketing arm, very inexpensive, low-cost marketing arm. Versus instead of paying for X ads or LinkedIn ads or doing simultaneously, they're utilizing these as another way just to get their name out there as a mass awareness. Whether it converts or not, they don't care. It's what appears because they're like playing a lot of the numbers, if you will, right? Now, if you think about this, majority of prospects, and I think the data was like 68 or 78% of prospects will do research before booking a call. They'll look at their website, they'll look at reviews, they'll Google it, they'll look on probably ChatGPT now, and just before they decide to hop on a call with the business. So what does that actually mean? What that means for a sales professional or for an entrepreneur or business owner is, hey, how can we make sure that, for lack of a better term, we're easily found? Whether they Google me, whether they look on YouTube, whether they look on X, how can I make sure I'm easily found? So that way I'm hopefully top of mind. That's going to be a big thing. So that means for being on social media really helps. So for instance, like when I'm Googled, like the first thing that pops up is my LinkedIn, and then it has like a bunch of stuff I do with Salesforce. And then it has like my YouTube. Knock on wood, I'm pretty much, as of right now, on the first page, everything on the first page is like basically me, which is really nice for having a common last name like Chen. So that's actually worked out pretty well. So when they Google me, it's easily found. So doing that's really key. I think the second thing, which ties into the point you mentioned earlier, which goes back to the offer, is to differentiate, you must have world-class fulfillment. Like your back end must be world-class. And the reason I say that is especially for how a lot of people buy outside just doing research. What else they do? They text their friends. They go into Slack communities like Pavilion, say, hey, what are you doing for X? So I'll give you an example. I'm just switching one of my tech stacks, and I did all my typical research and had some buddies with the same tech stack. So all I did was I texted them, hey man, here's my concern about this product. What have you seen? He's like, no issues at all. I'm like, this is how people buy these days. This is before I even hop on a call. So that's how a lot of these decisions are made these days, is like they're just doing their own homework already. So as a business owner, number one, just make sure you're easily found across the board and high value. And then number two, back and fulfillment's so good that people will talk about you and they'll rave about you. Because when they do that, it makes it better. So even earlier before Phil, we're talking about even my program, I continue to try to make it better and better over time because I'm trying to make sure that the experience is so good that people are telling their friends and family. So I'm the first person they think about. It doesn't happen overnight, but having a world-class product is a big part of it. And then of course, marketing it too and maximizing all those components I just mentioned.
So you had brought up a point, and this is something that we're uncovering a lot from having lots of conversations and really studying the market and where things are going. Cold outreach, in my personal opinion, is a marketing function now. Like it has transformed into a marketing function from a sales function where you can almost do massive amounts of outreach that are value-based. And we like to think of it like value engineering in a form or a way. I want to take it into your business currently. Actually, now we've talked a little bit about the future. How are you utilizing cold outreach right now, given all the tools that are out there? What does that look like for you current state?
We have a whole ecosystem that's important to understand. First off, we make sure the social piece, the Googleable piece is there. So like we're like relentless with posting content nonstop. It's high value. So if they were to Google us, it's easily found. This is across multiple platforms, right? But what we're also doing is we're leveraging like long form content like YouTube, and we're giving out so much value most people charge for completely free. So that's like the first, we're just as part of the ecosystem, we're making sure that's definitely a part of it. We also then utilize discovery ads and retargeting ads as part of that strategy, okay? And then on top of that, we then also utilize lead magnets, which are all pixeled. And this way we can capture information as part of that kind of overall ecosystem, because the outbound doesn't just start with just, oh, let me just scrape a bunch of leads and reach out to people. Like marketing is supposed to help with that outreach piece, right? Just like you mentioned, it's basically a marketing function, or we're making sure it's wholly cohesive as part of that process. And then on top of that, now all our organic content is driving towards all our free content and all our stuff we're posting, which is full of lead magnets. So we're trying to gather all that stuff. Then we're doing outreach, whether it's LinkedIn, cold email. The cold calling is really off all the opt-ins, right? But again, it's all part of that whole ecosystem. So before we even reach out to them, they may have seen us 10, 15, 20 times. So at one point, I was using one software. I could actually see every page they visited before we even called them. And it was always like a really consistent thing where, oh, look, looks like first they Googled something, we popped up, they clicked on this, then they jumped to these different pages, then they went to LinkedIn, went over here for a little bit, and then they opted into this. We tried calling a couple times, they didn't answer, and then they opted into something else. Then we call them again, and they booked a call like 2 weeks later. But because of that level of consumption, we also then know, I think the last time I pulled it, our average sales cycle for our smaller deals is like 7.2 days or something like that. So from the time they opted in, so we could see it because of what they're doing. So the outreach by itself is not a singular, hey, we just cold email. It's a comprehensive system, an ecosystem we built that hopefully is designed to nurture the prospects, increase their trust in us, and reduce their skepticism so they're open to having a conversation.
I love that you say that, 'cause especially when we've helped a bunch of clients, and then just from learning over the last few years, it's like cold outreach doesn't happen in a vacuum. Like you're saying, you can't just write a message and then forget what human nature happens, right? Like everyone goes and researches this. Who is this person who reached out to me? And so I love that you said that.
Exactly.
So that being said, what's your biggest pet peeve right now when you get cold outreach? When you're on the receiving end, what's your biggest pet peeve?
Yeah. Fake personalization. They just pretend. It's just, hey, I saw you went to University of Oregon. Go Ducks. Or I'll get these ones because they're like, hey, I saw you're a coach. Like, how you thought about writing a book? I'm like, dude, if you just Google me, like you probably could write a better message. Like I don't mean to be egotistical, but it's like, oh, if I already wrote a book, like maybe it's like, hey, I see you wrote a book. Hey, I can help you, increase your sales for it and generate more clients. Okay, interesting. Let's have a conversation. Or hey, maybe help you optimize your book to convert for more leads. Because I know you're going through Amazon right now, and Amazon, you don't get those leads. Okay, interesting. All right, that might be more peak to have a conversation. Or you can help me run Amazon ads. Like they just did a little bit of homework. It would have just resonated a lot more.
It ties in with your preparation point, right? It's one thing to mass blast, but we've got to at least do some research before we're sending out spam.
That's right.
I personally have found this to be incredibly enlightening. And looking back, I guess if you could start over knowing what you know now, what would you do differently in order to grow?
First off, it depends on who the market I'm going after. So that's really, really important. So whoever the market I'm going after, I want to figure out what's the easiest way to get in front of them. So that's the first piece. That means I hopefully know my ideal client profile. I also know exactly what my offer is going to be. And that's how I'm determined how I build out what my outreach is going to look like. That's really important. So for example, some people might hear, hey, Mark, so it sounds like you use LinkedIn to build your business. I should do the same thing. The reason I chose LinkedIn is because I knew account executives and B2B sales teams are easily found on LinkedIn. I know they hang out on LinkedIn. That's why I chose LinkedIn. So it was very targeted and very specific to it. Versus like my buddy who just started a new offer. He sells to the MSP firms and he can post on LinkedIn all day long, but typically these founders or CTOs he's going after, yeah, maybe they're on there, but they're not really active on there. So his best bet, his key outreach was he was able to get on a stage in front of 400 of them, teach something valuable, make a pitch, generate a ton of inbound leads. So because of that, the outreach to the people can adapt based off what you're actually doing. So that's what the first step is. You have to understand who are you going to go after, what's your offer going to be, and where are they already hanging out. Because if you can figure all those things out and get to where they're already looking, you can steal that traffic, if you will, and redirect it to you.
Wow, Marcus, this has been super enlightening and very interesting story. So I want to give you a chance. Where can people learn more about what you're doing, what you got going on next? Like, how can people find out more about you?
Awesome. First off, it's been a pleasure, guys. It's been a lot of fun jamming out today. You can find me pretty easily. You can head to LinkedIn, find me on LinkedIn or on YouTube, or go to benleyconsulting.com to find out more about our products and services.
Awesome.